and welcome to Songkla Rajapat University's MOOC course on English for the Workplace. I'm Gary Linton, and today I'm going to talk about how to present data and information when you want to describe a process. So in today's video, we'll take a look at some basic high-level details on what's the difference between companies' policies, processes, and procedures. Then we're going to take a look at an example process. We'll also take a quick look at some useful language to structure and connect your information and think a little bit about what's important in the processes. So let's get started. Just before we actually look at a process, one of the fathers of modern process design, W. Edward Deming, is quoted as saying, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And that's generally true. If you can't explain to people what the job is, how it's done, you don't properly understand it. So it's a good benchmark for understanding, do you know the role, the job you're doing. And it applies to everything we do. So it's worth keeping in mind. In a business environment, you find companies have policies. The policy is really a high-level rule about how the company should act. For example, in retail, you may have a policy on return of items. A customer buys something and wants to bring it back. They want their money back, but perhaps the company policy says you only get your money back if you have a receipt within 14 days. After 14 days, you can only get stored credit, or no receipt, you can only get stored credit. That's a policy, very high level, but doesn't explain how it happens, just basic rules. Process, that takes the idea and breaks it down into a series of high-level activities designed to make the outcome happen. So a process tells you, what do you actually do? So you'd have, for example, in the same scenario, a customer returns an item. The process might have, has a receipt, does not have a receipt. Item within 14 days, more than 14 days. And we take you step by step through the actions you should do to refund the customer. But again, it's still at quite a high level. There's not all the detail of how it actually works. The final level, procedure, or the detailed tasks. These are the nitty-gritty, the real detail of how to do something. So in my example, a customer returning something, there may be, for example, a form that must be completed. Fill in the details of the returned item. Check the item for damage. Refund the customer's money. You have to put the receipt, attach the original receipt to the claim form, send it to someone. Whatever the process may be, it specifies each task, the name of the form, who it goes to, and anyone who doesn't understand what to do should be able to read the procedures and follow them step by step. So these are all logical processes and a simple guide on how to do anything. So the one we're going to take a look at today will be talking about processes. And we're going to use this as an example. This is actually an extract from an IELTS task where you have to describe a process. In this case, we have to look at what has to happen. And when you look at things, we group them together into different tasks. In this case, I look at this and I see 10 main areas, 10 things that we do. number 9, and finally number 10. So describing a process is simple and logical. Just follow the route. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can divide them up in different ways. These three areas here, for example, we could think of as one process. You might group things together, and that's okay. The first picture here, a digger digs up clay. So let's see how that might look on describing a process. All I've done is state what's happening in that picture and the fact that it's number 1, it's the first thing. Number 2, the clay is then sifted. That's being put through a grid, through a metal grid onto a conveyor belt. So this little thing with rollers is called a conveyor belt. Number 3, and move to the next step where sand and water are added to the clay. You notice that this is a high level. There's a lot of information missing here. We don't know how big the grid is or why we're using it. Is it to remove rocks or to break up the clay? We don't know. When we add the sand and water, do we add equal amounts? Do we mix them together or just pour them on top? There's nothing in there about that in the process. But in the detailed requirements, then we would explain all of that information. When it goes along the conveyor belt, where does it go? So if you include a lot more information in the detail, this is still quite high level. Step 4. The resulting mixture, clay, sand and water, is then shaped into bricks by putting it into brick molds, one option, or pushing it through a rectangular hole, making a strip of clay, which is cut into brick-sized pieces using a wire cutter, just as described in the picture. Process 5. The bricks are then stacked in blocks. You can see the stack of bricks and put in a drying oven for 24 to 48 hours. So the time period we know about from the picture. Process 6. We're following the picture, so we're not always reading left to right. Here we've got 6, 7, 8, right to left. Before, another frequency word for when it's happening to help put things in order. Before being fired twice. First in a moderately hot kiln between 200 and 980 degrees C. Then, so we use the and to connect these, a high temperature kiln between 870 degrees C and 1300 degrees C. After this, so after being fired in 2 ovens, the bricks are moved into a cooling chamber and left to cool for 2 to 3 days. I don't need to always repeat exactly what's in the picture, but 48 hours is 2 days, 72 is 3 days. So that's just simplifying the information, making it easier to follow. At the end, once cooled, the finished bricks are packaged here in the packaging stage, and finally, the last thing, delivered to customers. So as you can see, each step I just picked 10 areas to talk about and describe each picture, using a connector to join them together. And finally, once cooled, then after that, next, phrases like this. I just want to kind of wrap up by giving you some of those vocabulary terms you can use to join the steps in your process. Every process will have its own unique set of actions, the verbs that happen, the nouns, the objects you're describing, and we join those together using very similar language. And when you get used to doing that, it'll help you understand how things are sequenced in order. So some useful language when we connect things. We might start using just simply step 1, step 2, step 3, number 1, number 2, number 3, bullet points, first, second, third. Any kind of ordinal number setup helps us do that. And some of the phrases that would go with that. At the beginning, the first step. Firstly, the first thing to do is initially, to begin with. So these are lots of ways we can talk about starting something. Everything in between, we can use a mix and match of then, next, after that, following, before. Following talks about something that's happened already before we go on to describe the next step. So before being put in the kiln, the bricks are dry. We can use these terms, and at the end we can use lastly, finally, the last step, the final step. Terms like that to help put the structure of your process together. Some other useful language we might want to include. And I've split this into three types of area for you about how important a step is. When we describe things, there are things that we absolutely must do, or obligations. It won't work if you don't do that. Things that are nice, the process may still happen, and it may not be absolutely essential, but it makes the process go more smoothly or in a better fashion. And if we want to remind the person about a particular task, whether it's an obligation or a nice to have, some things we can use as phrases for reminders. So our obligations. You must. You have to. You need to. Do. Don't. So obligations can be positive or negative, things we should or should not. You must not. Never or always. The two extremes of 100% of the time or 0%. Never, 0, always 100%. We can use those terms for things that have to be done or have to not be done. Things that are nice to have that can make things better, you should. Try to. If possible. Usually. Normally. If there's time. If you have a chance. So it's recognizing the idea that we don't always in the real world have a chance to do everything. If you can, get a copy of the customer's ID. The customer may not have anything, and you may not want to offend the customer by refusing to serve them without ID. It's nice to have, but not essential, so we can progress if we don't have it. So we may or may not require everything, but nice to have, we can mention them. And sometimes we want to just make sure no one forgets points. So we may refer back to things using, oh, my apologies, remember to, don't forget to, double check, make sure. These start phrases make sure the customer's driving license is in date and valid before giving them the keys to the rental car. Double check that the address on the driving license matches our records. So there may be things that you just want to remind people as part of the process. And those phrases we can find helpful to use to do that. I hope you find some of these useful. If you have to understand the process, what they mean, or you have to describe some of your job tasks to other people, good luck with it. And thank you very much for listening. Please do have a look at the questions associated with this video. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.